All right, so now we should be recording. Well, welcome to whoever's watching this video. I hope it's the professor and a few of the TAs, and I hope other people see this. So basically, just to go into it, my infographic is on Kubernetes. Kubernetes is a tool that is used heavily from a lot of cloud engineers and a lot of DevOps engineers really use this tool heavily. Um, so basically, the problem that kind of goes into it is that this tool is a tool that allows software developers to build, scale, and deploy microservice architectures, which there were not many of those before itself. Instances that are kind of like, before developers, as I put this image right here, developers would really be crunched on time, building projects and whatnot, and then they would have to face the next behemoth of trying to actually deploy projects. And that's not really that easy. That was not really that easy before Docker and those things were around. Before you had to build jar files and tar them up and send them over, and then kind of hope things would work. So that was kind of a big problem. So I ended up doing some literature research, and as you'll see, I'll put some of the references down below. But I ended up finding out about tools like Docker and other containerization tools to deploy full-scale applications and develop like Google. Actually, Kubernetes is this one. So to give a little quick summary, Docker are kind of like little containers. They're like the little minions that end up doing the work, and then Kubernetes like the orchestrator. It's kind of like the evil guy from the Despicable Me. Yeah, it's Despicable Me. The evil guy from Minions is basically like Kubernetes in this instance for this part. The critical analysis is that basically, this is kind of like a little difficult to understand, but Kubernetes has native built-in discovery. So basically, like, with native discovery, you can basically, it generates how different services speak to one another by declaring them with an instance called a service name. And this is a really neat tool because back then, trying to connect services to talk to one another, you had to make them very specific and you had to, identify it. And like, for example, in the future, if you wanted to change that, you had to change it in code actually inside on the back end of some projects to change it. Well, with Kubernetes, it can automatically discover one another using the native service discovery. So that's a really cool tool. And then that can even be used to build things like gateways for programs when they're large scale. So as I was talking about earlier, it has the automatic built-in scaling. And another cool thing is Kubernetes has native load balancing, so it can balance. So for example, if you spin up three instances of the same project, as I'll show later on, it can actually load balance between the three and make sure none of them get overwhelmed. And then finally, the most interesting thing about it is that it's very difficult to learn, but once you do, it is one of the greatest cloud tools to learn. And then here are a few references of where I got some of my information about Kubernetes. And then just to kind of show like an example of a project, it's not on this computer, but basically, so like here's like a project that I have running here. Obviously I didn't do like the full example, and like I should have ran in a Docker's container and then had Kubernetes to speak to it. But what you could do is you could end up using this service to actually, for example, you'll see it running, and this is just like an API, and it's running and it's hosting a web server. So because this is running a web server, it kind of builds and then it runs the project on a certain port. So as you can see here, this service started on port 8080, and then you could now have services like a front-end application with like a static web page by easily hosting with GitHub Pages is one example. But you can end up hosting this here by clicking on the file, opening with live server, and it opens an instance of it in port 5050. And then the project actually won't work, fun fact, because um, I'm not connected to the UFVPN, which is what uses the database. But like, this project right here and this project, usually in instances, they would be able to communicate with one another. But the only issue is you have to specify exactly like what is allowed to communicate. Now, for example, if you were to use something like Kubernetes, you wouldn't have to do this with this code. And it'd be so much easier to deploy, and you could just deploy it all together in one, which is kind of like the beauty of like deploying Kubernetes. And it also helps you to, kind of save scripts and not have to build the process all over again. But that's kind of my little demo that I have. Thank you for watching my infographic, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope everyone that watches this has a very nice, happy holidays. Thank you.